Welcome to the House of Air Book Club. Today we are reading Chapter 3 of The Pawn of Prophecy by David Eddings, Book 1 of the Bulgariad. Chapter 3. Some few mornings later, when Aunt Paul had begun to scowl at his continued lurking in her kitchen, the old man made excuse of some errand to the nearby village of Upper Gralt. "Good," Aunt Paul said, somewhat ungraciously. "At least my pantries will be safe while you're gone." He bowed mockingly, his eyes twinkling. "Do you need anything, Mistress Paul?" he asked. "Some trifling thing I might purchase for you, as long as I'm going anyway." Aunt Paul thought for a moment. "Some of my spice pots are a bit low," she said, "and there's a Talmudran spice merchant in Fennel Lane, just south of the town tavern. I'm sure you'll have no trouble finding the tavern." "The trip's likely to be dry," the old man admitted pleasantly, "and lonely, too. 10 leagues with no one to talk to is a long way." "Talk to the birds," Aunt Paul suggested bluntly. "Birds listen well enough," the old man said, "but their speech is repetitious and quickly grows tiresome. Why don't I take the boy along for company?" Garyon held his breath. "He's picking up enough bad habits on his own," Aunt Paul said tartly. "I prefer his not having expert instruction." "Why, Mistress Paul," the old man objected, stealing a cruller almost absently, "you do me an injustice. Besides, a change will do the boy good. Broaden his horizons, you might say." "His horizons are quite broad enough, thank you," she said. Garyon's heart sank. "Still," she continued, "at least I can count on him not to forget my spices altogether, or to become so fuddled with ale that he confuses peppercorns with cloves, or cinnamon with nutmeg. Very well. Take the boy along, but mind, I don't want you taking him into any low or disreputable places." "Mistress Paul," the old man said, feigning shock, "would I frequent such places?" "I know you too well, old wolf," she said dryly. "You take to vice and corruption as naturally as a duck takes to a pond. If I hear that you've taken the boy into any unsavory places, you and I will have words." "Then I'll have to make sure that you don't hear of anything like that, won't I?" Aunt Paul gave him a hard look. "I'll see which spices I need," she said. "And I'll borrow a horse and cart from Faldor," the old man said, stealing another cruller. In a surprisingly short time, Garyon and the old man were bouncing along the rutted road to Upper Gralt behind a fast-trotting horse. It was a bright summer morning, and there were a few dandelion-puffed clouds in the sky and deep blue shadows under the hedgerows. After a few hours, however, the sun became hot, and the jolting ride became tiresome. "Are we almost there?" Garyon asked for the third time. "Not for some time yet," the old man said. 10 leagues is a goodly distance." "I was there once before," Garyon told him, trying to sound casual. "Of course, I was only a child at the time, so I don't remember too much about it. It seems to be quite a fine place." The old man shrugged. "It's a village," he said. "Much like any other." He seemed a bit preoccupied. Garyon, hoping to nudge the old man into a story to make the miles go faster, began asking questions. "Why is it that you don't have a name, if I'm being impolite in asking?" "I have many names," the old man said, scratching his white beard. "Almost as many names as I have years." "I've only got one," Garyon said, "so far." "What?" "You only have one so far," the old man explained. "In time you may get another, or even several. Some people collect names as they go along through their lives. Sometimes names wear out, just like clothes." "Aunt Paul calls you Old Wolf," Garyon said. "I know," the old man said. "Your Aunt Paul and I have known each other for a very long time." "Why does she call you that?" "Who can say why a woman such as your Aunt Paul does anything?" "May I call you Mr. Wolf?" Garyon asked. Names were quite important to Garyon, and the fact that the old storyteller did not seem to have one had always bothered him. That namelessness had made the old man seem somehow incomplete, unfinished. The old man looked at him soberly for a moment, and then he burst out laughing. "Mr. Wolf, indeed. How very appropriate. I think I like that name better than any I've had in years." "May I, then," Garyon asked, "call you Mr. Wolf, I mean?" "I think I'd like that, Garyon. I think I'd like that very much." Now, would you please tell me a story, Mr. Wolf? Geryon asked. The time and distance went by much faster then, as Mr. Wolf wove for Geryon tales of glorious adventure and dark treachery taken from those gloomy, unending centuries of the horrendous Civil War. Why are the Arends like that? Geryon asked after a particularly grim tale. The Arends are very noble, Wolf said, lounging back in the seat of the cart with the reins held negligently in one hand. Nobility is a trait that's not always trustworthy, since it sometimes causes men to do things for obscure reasons. Rendorig's an Arend, Geryon said. He sometimes seemed to be, well, not too quick of thought, if you know what I mean. It's the effort of all that nobility, Wolf said. Arends spend so much time concentrating on being noble that they don't have time to think of other things. They came over the crest of the long hill, and there in the next valley lay the village of Upper Gralt. To Geryon, the tiny cluster of grey stone houses with slate roofs seems disappointingly small. 2 roads, white with thick dust, intersected there, and there were a few narrow, winding streets besides. The houses were square and solid, but seemed almost like toys set down in the valley below. The horizon beyond was ragged with the mountains of eastern Cinderia, and though it was summer, the tops of most of the mountains were still wrapped in snow. Their tired horse plodded down the hill towards the village, his hooves stirring little clouds of dust with each step, and soon they were clattering along the cobblestone streets towards the center of the village. The villagers, of course, were all too important to pay any attention to an old man and a small boy in a farm cart. The women wore gowns and high-pointed hats, and the men wore doublets and soft velvet caps. Their expressions seemed haughty, and they looked with obvious disdain at the few farmers in town who respectfully stood aside to let them pass. "They're very fine, aren't they?" Geryon observed. "They seem to think so," Wolf said, his expression faintly amused. "I think it's time that we found something to eat, don't you?" Though he had not realized it until the old man mentioned it, Geryon was suddenly ravenous. "Where can we go?" he asked. "They all seem so splendid. Would any of them let strangers sit at their tables?" Wolf laughed and shook a jingling purse at his waist. "We shouldn't have any trouble making acquaintances," he said. "There are places where one can buy food." Buy food? Geryon had never heard of such a thing before. Anyone who appeared at Feldersgate at mealtime was invited to the table as a matter of course. The world of the villagers was obviously very different from the world of Felder's farm. "But I don't have any money," he objected. "I've got enough for us both," Wolf assured him, stopping their horse before a low, large building with a sign bearing a picture of a cluster of grapes hanging just above its door. There were words on the sign, but of course Geryon could not read them. "What do the words say, Mr. Wolf?" he asked. "They say that food and drink can be bought inside," Wolf told him, getting down from the cart. "It must be a fine thing to be able to read," Geryon said wistfully. The old man looked at him, seemingly surprised. "You can't read, boy?" he asked incredulously. "I've never found anyone to teach me," Geryon said. "Felder reads, I think, but no one else at the farm knows how." "Nonsense," Wolf snorted. "I'll speak to your aunt about it. She's been neglecting her responsibility. She should have taught you years ago." "Can Aunt Pole read?" Geryon asked, stunned. "Of course she can," Wolf said, leading the way into the tavern. "She says she finds little advantage in it, but she and I had that particular argument out years ago." The old man seemed quite upset by Geryon's lack of education. Geryon, however, was far too interested in the smoky interior of the tavern to pay much attention. The room was large and dark, with a low-beamed ceiling and a stone floor strewn with rushes. Though it was not cold, a fire burned in a stone pit in the center of the room, and the smoke rose errantly towards a chimney set above it on 4 square stone pillars. Tallow candles guttered in clay dishes on several of the long stained tables, and there was a reek of wine and stale beer in the air. "What have you to eat?" Wolf demanded of a sour, unshaven man wearing a grease-spotted apron. "We've a bit of joint left," the man said, pointing at the spit resting to one side of the fire pit. "Roasted only day before yesterday. and meat porridge fresh yesterday morning, and bread no more than a week old." "Very well," Wolf said, sitting down. "And I'll have a pot of your best ale, and milk for the boy." "Milk," Geryon protested. "Milk," Wolf said firmly. "You have money?" the sour-looking man demanded. Wolf jingled his purse, and the sour man looked suddenly less sour. "Why's that man over there sleeping?" Geryon asked, pointing at a snoring villager sitting with his head down on one of the tables. "Drunk," Wolf said, scarcely glancing at the snoring man. "Shouldn't someone take care of him?" "He'd rather not be taken care of." "Do you know him?" "I know of him," Wolf said, "and many others like him. I've occasionally been in that condition myself." "Why?" "It seemed appropriate at the time." The roast was dry and overdone. The meat porridge was thin and watery, and the bread was stale, but Geryon was too hungry to notice. He carefully cleaned his plate as he had been taught, then sat as Mr. Wolf lingered over a second pot of ale. "Quite splendid," he said, more to be saying something than out of any real conviction. All in all, he found that Upper Gault did not quite live up to his expectations. "Adequate," Wolf shrugged. "Village taverns are much the same the world over. I've seldom seen one I'd hurry to revisit. Shall we go?" He laid down a few coins, which the sour-looking man snatched up quickly, and led Geryon back out into the afternoon sunlight. "Let's find your aunt's spice merchant," he said, "and then see to a night's lodging, and a stable for our horse." They set off down the street, leaving horse and cart beside the tavern. The house of the Tolnedron spice merchant was a tall, narrow building in the next street. Two swarthy, thick-bodied men in short tunics lounged in the street at his front door near a fierce-looking black horse, wearing a curious armored saddle. The two men stared with dull-eyed disinterest at the passers-by in the lane. Mr. Wolf stopped when he caught sight of them. "Is something wrong?" Geryon asked. "Thulls," Wolf said quietly, looking hard at the two men. "What?" "Those two are thulls," the old man said. "They usually work as porters for the Murgos." "What are Murgos?" "The people of Thul Murgos," Wolf said shortly. "Southern Angarax." "The ones we beat at the Battle of Vomimber?" Geryon asked. "Why would they be here?" "The Murgos have taken up commerce," Wolf said, frowning. "I hadn't expected to see one of them in so remote a village. We might as well go in. The Thulls have seen us, and it might look strange if we turned now and went back. Stay close to me, boy, and don't say anything." They walked past the two heavy-set men and entered the spice merchant's shop. The Tolnedron was a thin, bald-headed man, wearing a brown belted robe that reached to the floor. He was nervously weighing several packets of pungent-smelling powder which lay on the counter before him. "Good day to you," he said to Wolf. "Please have patience. I'll be with you shortly." He spoke with a light lisp that Geryon found peculiar. "No hurry," Wolf said in a wheezy, cracking voice. Geryon looked at him sharply, and was astonished to see that his friend was stooped and that his head was nodding foolishly. "See to their needs," the other man in the shop said shortly. He was a dark, burly man, wearing a chain-mail shirt and a short sword belted to his waist. His cheekbones were high, and there were several savage-looking scars on his face. His eyes looked curiously angular, and his voice was harsh and thickly accented. "No hurry," Wolf said in his wheezy cackle. "My business here will take some time," the Murgo said coldly, "and I prefer not to be rushed. Tell the merchant here what you need, old man." "My thanks, then," Wolf cackled. "I have a list somewhere about me." He began to fumble foolishly in his pockets. "My master drew it up. I do hope you can read it, friend merchant, for I cannot." He finally found the list and presented it to the Tolnedron. The merchant glanced at the list. "This will only take a moment," he told the Murgo. The Murgo nodded and stood staring stonily at Wolf and Geryon. His eyes narrowed slightly, and his expression changed. "You're a seemly-looking boy," he said to Geryon. "What's your name?" Until that moment, in his entire life, Geryon had been an honest and truthful boy, but Wolf's manner had opened before his eyes an entire world of deception and subterfuge. Somewhere in the back of his mind he seemed to hear a warning voice, a dry, calm voice, advising him that the situation was dangerous and that he should take steps to protect himself. He hesitated only an instant before telling his first deliberate lie. He allowed his mouth to drop open, and his face to assume an expression of vacant-headed stupidity. "Rundorig, your honor," he mumbled. "An horrendous name," the Murgo said, his eyes narrowing even more. "You don't look like an Arend." Geryon gaped at him. "Are you an Arend, Rundorig?" the Murgo pressed. Geryon frowned, as if struggling with a thought while his mind raced. The dry voice suggested several alternatives. "My father was," he said finally, "but my mother's a Centaur, and people say I favor her." "You say was," the Murgo said quickly. "Is your father dead, then?" His scarred face was intent. Geryon nodded foolishly. A tree he was cutting fell on him," he lied. "It was a long time ago." The Murgo suddenly seemed to lose interest. "Here's a copper penny for you, boy," he said, indifferently tossing a small coin to the floor at Geryon's feet. "It has the likeness of the god Torak stamped on it. Perhaps it will bring you luck, or at least more wit." Wolf stooped quickly and retrieved the coin, but the coin he handed to Geryon was a common Sendarian penny. "Thank the good man, Rundorig," he wheezed. "My thanks, your honor," Geryon said, concealing the penny tight in his fist. The Murgo shrugged and looked away. Wolf paid the Tolnedran merchant for the spices, and he and Geryon left the shop. "You played a dangerous game, boy," Wolf said once they were out of earshot of the two lounging thulls. "You seem not to want him to know who we were," Geryon explained. "I wasn't sure why, but I thought I ought to do the same. Was what I did wrong?" "You're very quick," Wolf said approvingly. "I think we managed to deceive the Murgo." "Why did you change the coin?" Geryon asked. "Sometimes Angarak coins aren't what they seem," Wolf said. "It's better for you not to have any of them. Let's fetch our horse and cart. It's a long way back to Falder's farm." "I thought we were going to take lodgings for the night." "That's changed now. Come along, boy. It's time for us to leave." The horse was very tired, and he moved slowly up the long hill out of Upper Grault as the sun went down ahead of them. "Why wouldn't you let me keep the Angarak penny, Mr. Wolf?" Geryon persisted. The subject still puzzled him. "There are many things in this world that seem to be one thing, but are in fact another," Wolf said somewhat grimly. "I don't trust Angaraks, and I particularly don't trust Murgos. It'd be just as well, I think, if you never had anything in your possession that bears the likeness of Torak." "But the war between the West and the Angaraks has been over for 500 years now," Geryon objected. "All men say so." "Not all men," Wolf said. "Now take that robe out of the back of the cart and cover up. Your aunt would never forgive me if I let you take a chill." "I will, if you think I should," Geryon said, "but I'm not a bit cold, and not at all sleepy. I'll keep you company as we go." "That'll be a comfort, boy," Wolf said. "Mr. Wolf," Geryon said after some time, "did you know my mother and father?" "Yes," Wolf said quietly. "My father's dead too, isn't he?" "I'm afraid so." Geryon sighed deeply. "I thought so," he said. "I wish I'd known them. Aunt Paul said I was only a baby when—" He couldn't bring himself to say it. "I've tried to remember my mother, but I can't." "You were very small," Wolf said. "What were they like?" Wolf scratched at his beard. "Ordinary," he said. "So ordinary you wouldn't look twice at either one of them." Geryon was offended by that. "Aunt Paul says my mother was very beautiful," he objected. "She was." "Then how can you say she was ordinary?" "She wasn't prominent or important," Wolf said. "Neither was your father. Anyone who saw them thought that they were just a simple village people. A young man with his young wife and their baby. That's all anyone ever saw. That's all anyone was ever supposed to see." "I don't understand." "It's very complicated." What was my father like?" "Medium size," Wolf said. "Dark hair. Very serious young man. I liked him." "Did he love my mother?" "More than anything." And me? Of course. What kind of place did they live in? It was a small place, Wolf said. A little village near the mountains, a long way from any main roads. They had a cottage at the end of the street. It was a small, solid little house. Your father built it himself. He was a stone cutter. I used to stop by there once in a while when I was in the neighborhood. The old man's voice droned on, describing the village and the house and the two who lived there. Garion listened, not even realizing it, when he fell asleep. It must have been very late, almost on towards dawn. In a half-drowse, the boy felt himself lifted from the cart and carried up a flight of stairs. The old man was surprisingly strong. Aunt Paul was there. He knew that without even opening his eyes. There was a particular scent about her that he could have found in a dark room. Best cover him up, Mr. Wolf said softly to Aunt Paul. Best not wake him just now. What happened? Aunt Paul asked, her voice as soft as the old man's. There was a Murgo in town, at your spice merchant's. He asked questions and tried to give the boy an Angaric penny. In Upper Grault? Are you certain he was only a Murgo? It's impossible to tell. Not even I can distinguish between Murgo and Grolum with any certainty. What happened to the coin? I was quick enough to get it. I gave the boy a Sundarian penny instead. If our Murgo was a Grolum, we'll let him follow me. I'm sure I can give him several months of entertainment. You're leaving, then? Aunt Paul's voice seemed somehow sad. It's time, Wolf said. Right now the boy's safe enough here, and I must be abroad. There are things afoot I must see to. When Murgos begin to appear in remote places, I begin to worry. We have a great responsibility and a great care placed upon us, and we mustn't allow ourselves to become careless. Will you be gone long? Aunt Paul asked. Some years, I expect. There are many things I must look into, and many people I'll have to see. I'll miss you, Aunt Paul said softly. He laughed. Sentimentality, Paul, he said dryly. That's hardly in character. You know what I mean. I'm not suited for this task you and the others have given me. What do I know about the raising of small boys? You're doing well, Wolf said. Keep the boy close, and don't let his nature drive you into hysterics. Be careful, he lies like a champion. Garion? Her voice was shocked. He lied to the Murgo so well that even I was impressed. Garion? He has also started asking questions about his parents, Wolf said. How much have you told him? Very little. Only that they're dead. Let's leave it at that for now. There's no point in telling him things he isn't old enough to cope with yet. Their voices went on, but Garion drifted off into sleep again, and he was almost sure that it was all a dream. But the next morning, when he awoke, Mr. Wolf was gone. Thank you for listening along with us. This book is usually available wherever your favorite books can be found. For more chapters, see the playlist down at the bottom. Like or subscribe if that's your thing. We love you like burning. Bye-bye.